Good morning, everyone. So, for those of you that are just tuning in, my name is Nancy Amar. I'm an occupational therapist. I've been working with children for 13 years now, and I do specialize with children with autism, but definitely have seen and worked with all kinds of kids. So, last week we spoke about positive parenting. And we talked about the three things that you have to first instill before getting started. And that was that you have to look at ultimately, what do I want for my child? What is the lesson that I want them to learn? The second thing you want to look at is that you're not your child's friend. That's the second thing you want to do. And then the third thing was we talked about leverage. So today we're going to get into leverage a little bit more so that you can get practical solutions on how to implement the positive parenting in your family. So when I talk about leverage, what I mean by that is you as a parent having control of certain things in your home, in your family, things that motivate your child so that you can use them as leverage, meaning as a privilege or as a consequence if you need to, okay? And those are always important to have. So basically your child is not just getting anything that they want just for breathing, but really, earning these things. So let's get into it, okay? Before starting any kind of anything that you want to start implementing in your home in terms of disciplining children, you have to have the right mindset. And I always talk about the right mindset first. So two huge premises to start with, right? Number one is that when we're disciplining a child, it's not about ego. It's not about who has control, who's going to have the last word. I'm the mom or the dad and you're the child. It's really about wanting your child to learn a different way of acting, right? They've acted a certain way and you want them to learn a different and more appropriate way for them to act, which in long term as an adult will serve them. So again, it's not a it's not a struggle of the mind and who gets the last word. It's not that ego. It's really going in there and really thinking, what do I teach my child? What do I want them to learn? And what kind of behavior do I want to see? Okay. A lot of research has actually shown that when a child is in fear, right, fear of being either punished or hit or yelled at, what happens is that the blood flow starts going directly in an area of the brain where we kick in survival mode, right, the fight or flight mechanism. And when a child is in fight or flight mechanism, or an adult or anyone really, what happens is that we kind of start shutting down all the problem solving skills that we have. We also don't take in information the same way, right? So you're really in survival mode at that point, and that's when you start seeing, we see this all the time. You catch a child doing something and then they start lying, right? They lie because of that fear. They're in that fear mode. So we have seen that long term what it creates is actually children that are impulsive adults and have not the best problem solving skills. So when you think about something like that, you really want to think, okay, well, as an adult, I want my child to grow up to be an adult that has good problem solving skills, can think from a higher level of consciousness, So when we parent, we really want to start off from that premise, even when it's to the point of disciplining a child. Now, the second thing, and I think most important thing that we have to be really mindful about is that you do not want to equate behavior with your child's worth, right? So, and sometimes it's something really, really subtle. Even as a therapist myself, I've had to be really, really careful with what I say to the children. If I say something like, oh, wow, you're such a great listener, what a good boy, right? So now the equation in their mind subconsciously is, if I listen, I'm a good boy, but if I don't listen, then I'm not a good boy. I'm a bad boy, right? So really being more mindful of our words that we choose, and also really making a child understand that it's the behavior that I don't like, but I love you unconditionally. Whether you do something good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, it doesn't change how much I love you, but it's the behavior that you're doing that I don't like, right? So really finding the right words to say to our children when we are disciplining them. All right, so now that we're in the mindset, we're going to enter into what we can do be a little bit more practical. All right, so the first thing is usually the easiest one. We're going to talk about privileges and incentives. So in general, I always believe that if a child does not need the incentive, right, we don't want to implement all these charts. For example, a morning routine. If your child is, is pretty easily getting dressed and brushing their teeth and doing everything, then don't just create an incentive chart, right? Because now, ultimately what we want is for the child to find inherent value in what they're doing, that they accomplished it on their own, not because they're going to get a prize or a sticker at the end, right? So if you're not seeing these behaviors, if it's not a challenge for your child, don't make it because you think now it's fun and they're going to have a chart with stickers on it. Okay, you want to not do it if you don't need to. But for a child that needs a push in the right direction, we use incentive charts for either helping them out with routine or with chores, for example, right? So those are fun ways for kids to have a little bit more incentives to do things that they're not very motivated by, right? So I always say, keep it very simple. You don't need to put a million things on a list. Just really keep it simple, just a few things. And then the nice thing would be if you want to really teach a child to have delayed gratification, right? So not an immediate prize for anything that they do, but rather they have to win it for a few days, see that certain behavior consistently, and then we can win some kind of reward, okay? Another thing about incentives is I like the children to actually create their own incentive charts with you. The more involved the child is in creating it, they're actually going to be more likely to stick to it. So that's a really fun way to do it with them. They pick the chart, they can color it in, they pick the stickers that they want to put on it. Again, the more involved they are in it, the more likely they are to really do it versus you just imposing something on them. Let's see. Rewards. So let's talk about the rewards. Rewards, I'm not one for giving toys, giving food. That's not something that I usually go for. I rather a child wins a reward, for example, you get to read an extra book before bedtime, or you spend 5 more minutes with mom and dad, something like that. Or we go to the playground for an extra 10 minutes, or during the week, an extra day of the week, we'll go to the playground. Something that's active. I like a child to do something that's active, an art project with mom and dad or something like that, rather than giving food or giving a toy, right? I do use toys as a reward, but I do that when I have to take out the big guns, right? So I've done it very much, for example, when I've done handwriting with kids that are, like 10-year-old, 11-year-old boys, right? Who really couldn't care less about making their handwriting neat, and this is what I got called in for. So with them, the incentive chart works beautifully. So we pick what we want as a prize, and it's something usually big, but it's hard to really get to that prize because they're really working on their handwriting, and that's really the only way that I can get them to do it, because intrinsically they're not motivated. They're not motivated to fix their handwriting. I also use, prizes when, let's say it's a skill that's a little difficult for a child to attain, such as potty training, or you want them to sleep in their own bed. Something like that, I do definitely do a prize, because it's something that's very, very motivating for them. And you know that a lot of effort will have to be put into eliminating or creating certain behaviors. All right, so again, let's just recap really quickly. You want to keep a chart really simple. You don't put more than 4 or 5 things on a chart that they have to work for. If you can do it, that they inherently just want to do it as a checklist, for example, and that they're happy just, completing their checklist of what they've done, that's wonderful. If a child needs more of a push and that we're working on getting stickers for something, then you take it from there. I mean, you know your own child, so you know what will work, you know what they need, but don't go all out and give, prizes if you really don't need to go there. So now we're going to talk about consequences. That's a little bit more difficult. So Again, you want to use consequences when you're looking to extinguish a negative behavior. Okay, that's the idea behind it. And when we use a consequence, again, this is where we kick in the whole idea of this is not to punish your child, to make them feel ashamed, to make them feel, sad about what they've done. It's really to try and teach a different way to do something that they've done. So going in with that mindset, again, you're going to problem solve really differently when you enter the discipline in that sense. The first thing you want to do when you create consequences in your home is you want to be really clear about what your expectations are and what the consequences are. So instead of saying something like, if you misbehave, you're going in timeout, which is very vague, you want to say something more like a specific behavior. If you hit your sister, you're going for alone time in your room, right? So that's more specific. They know clearly if they do certain things, specific something, what they're going to get as a consequence. If you get too vague, that's when they start playing around with it, or they truly don't understand what you mean by good behavior. I mean, talking very, very loud could be a good behavior to them, but to you, it might be something that you don't want in your home. So you got to be really clear with your child as to what is the behavior that you're looking for and what is the consequence to it. Another thing about consequences, they have to be done immediately, right? So a child misbehaves, does whatever it is, whatever consequence you're going to implement has to be done right away. You can't do it the next day. Then we've lost that window of learning, right? And then the cool thing about consequences is that a lot of times they're just natural consequences and you don't really have to do anything about it. For example, if a child is never picking up their toys and they lost the toy, so now the natural consequence is actually that they lost their toy, and that's very upsetting to them. So you don't have to go ahead and now add another consequence and say, well, because you lose your toys, now I'm not buying you anything, right? That just frustrates them and there's no point. The whole point is for them to learn that if they misplace something, they're going to lose it and it doesn't feel good. They're already at that point, right? So you don't need to go add more and more consequences to something that they're already naturally learning because they've done a certain behavior, right? So the natural consequences are usually the easiest. Now, when it's not a natural consequence and that you have to do something about it, you have to implement something. Once again, you want to make sure that the consequence matches the behavior that you've seen. So if a child, for example, hits their sister, the consequence of, let's say, well, now you can't play with your iPad tonight, doesn't really match, right? What are they learning? They're not learning anything. They're going to learn to be frustrated, right? But rather, we don't hit in our home. We want to feel safe in our home. If you hit your sister, you need to be alone in your room until you're ready to come out and act in a way that's safe for everyone. Now you're putting a consequence that's directly related to a behavior. And it's also related to what you want them to learn, that there's a different way to get upset and you don't have to raise your hands. So when we want to extinguish a behavior, for example, hitting or whining, there's four different things that we want to implement. Number one, I like using visuals, right? The more visuals you can use for a child, the better, because then you don't have to be talking to them and they don't hear anything, So as much visuals as you can use is better. I like using a chart where, for example, it's on a scale. So you start off on green, for example, and then there's yellow, and then there's red, right? So they're moving in the scale. So green is, we're ready to start the day, we're gonna have an awesome day. And then as we're moving along the day, if they are not behaving properly, then they're moving along the scale, right? There's a warning, and then, the last would be, you're getting your consequence. But I also like that the scale could go the other way, right? Because we all make mistakes in life and you want them to learn that, right? You want them to say, all right, well, if you're not doing great during the day, you can still fix that and you'll go back towards the green side of the scale, right? It doesn't have to be a one-way scale, which I think is actually very frustrating and is kind of scary for a child. They always have that over their head, or it doesn't help them calm. Once they do something and they think they're up on that scale in the red zone and now they're gonna get a consequence, right? There's that panic, and you want them to know that you can still reverse that. You still have the power to reverse that behavior, right? And I will acknowledge it. Another thing to look at is when a child misbehaves, what you want to do is really the first thing you want to do is remove them from the environment that they were in where they misbehaved, right? Even if they're not, for example, hitting, and that you want to separate them from a sibling or from a friend, just changing the environment completely changes the mindset too, right? You have better chances of calming them. So it's not a punishment of being removed from a situation. It's really more for them to understand, all right, let's cool down. This is our time to cool down, right? And I do teach in my sessions different ways for children to cool down, namely breathing, and I do these little visuals that they can do in order to breathe. They, some kind of fidget toy or something calming. We talked about it when we talked about meltdowns, right? Same ideas. You might want to create a little corner in your child's bedroom where they can go there for their little quiet time, right? They can go there and, have some pillows, some music, something calming, some kind of fidget toy, whatever it is that helps them calm. So you want to remove them from the situation. You want them to calm. That's step number one, right? Because there's no point starting to teach them what you want to teach them in terms of the consequence and the behavior that you want to see when they're still up here, right? We really want to get them to be completely calm so that they're not in what we called that fight or flight. Now they're being able to take in information and problem solve a little bit more. Now, once your child is calm, that's where I do what I called the rewind replay method, right? So we rewind the situation and we're going to replay it in a more efficient and a more appropriate way, right? So for instance, if a child pulled away a toy from a sibling or from a friend for a play date or whatever it is and hit them because they absolutely wanted that toy, once your child is calm, I discuss with them. You could discuss with them. So what would have been a better way for you to get that toy, right? And I mean, children are smart. They know this. They know the drill, right? But they're reactive. A lot of times they're just very reactive. So when you get them calm and they can see that you're not trying to really get them in trouble, but that you're there with them trying to solve this, you'll get the answers that you need, right? And you can always guide them. Don't push the answers, but guide them to bring that information out and problem solve it themselves. So they rewind the situation, we talk about it, and you don't have to talk at length. That's another thing. I find a lot of parents talk to their kids at length, and it's too much. Now you lost your child, right? So once you get the point out, then we go back and now we're going to replay the situation. You join your friend, you join your sibling or whatever it is, and you replay the scene again, right? Give back the toy how it was and have the child ask for it. I'm not a big fan of going and apologizing right away to someone. A lot of parents say, go say sorry. I don't believe in that, because now your child is saying sorry from a place where it's not authentic. So you really want them to say sorry when they're really meaning it, right? So usually this is what I found with my experience, that when we do that little rewind replay method, and now that they're here, they're more calm and they're talking to their friend or their sibling, they naturally start wanting to apologize, and that's when you can encourage it, right? Well, what do we say, to our friend, or what do we say to our sister, right? And that's when you could encourage the saying sorry. Another thing that I do with children is then take them aside and, try to make them understand how their behavior is making somebody else feel. So a lot of times they don't see that. Of course they don't see that. It happens over and over again, but ask them how they would feel in that situation, how it makes them feel. And usually the way it makes them feel, that's how it makes other people feel. And you don't really want to do something that doesn't feel good to you, then you don't do it onto somebody else, right? And that's when, again, the empathy comes up and the desire to apologize comes up, and it's coming from a more authentic place rather than having your child go over there and just being really upset and saying, I'm sorry, and they really don't mean it. So what are we teaching our child, really? Are you teaching to just say sorry when you don't even mean it? Because what, it looks good? I don't even know for what. I don't understand why we do that, right? We really have to come from that authentic place. And also not wanting them to learn that when you just say sorry, then everything's okay, even if you don't mean it. the last thing we want to look at is, right, so the last thing we want to look at is exactly what we were just saying is, you know, being able to get your child to understand how their actions affect others, right? That it's not just them doing something and no one's affected. Really, that your behaviors affect somebody else. And again, if something like this is difficult for your child, you can read a lot of storybooks. Storybooks are a great way for them to just see themselves in something else, right? And to being able to reflect. So those are the things to implement when you're implementing consequences. Again, I'm not a big fan of, you know, of yelling, of that whole control thing. I think that children are really, really smart, and if you just give them the time to calm out of that, you know, reactive situation, they're actually really brilliant at finding solutions themselves or understanding what they've done. But we have to enter it in that mindset of really telling yourself, all right, I want them to do something different. How do I get them there, right? Versus I want to punish them. They did something bad, and they need to be punished for it. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you do have any questions, please feel free to send me a little message. If you want some ideas of consequences that are appropriate for certain behaviors, I can help you out with that as well. Or if you want to see some incentive charts, I can send you those as well. All right, have a wonderful day.